And we're live. Welcome to Don't Be Coy. I'm your host, Uncle Lew, and today I have the honor, pleasure, and the utmost appreciation to have with me today Miss Kasia Redding. Kasia, thank you for being on the show. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
Doing pretty good. How was your previous week?
It was pretty long, I would say, preparing for finals.
Oh, okay. That's cool. That's cool. So, for the people at home, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, my name is Kasia Redding. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. I am a current law school student, at Southern University Law Center, and I'm in my second year. So,
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds good. Thank you for sharing all those. So, I wanted to talk with you a little bit today about, like, as you mentioned beforehand, being originally in Chicago, from Chicago, but like you've lived in like a lot of different places. So, like, do you mind kind of giving a little bit of overview of all the places you've had lived?
yes. So I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I moved out of the city, I want to say at like 18, immediately after graduating high school. And I moved to Tougaloo, Mississippi, where I studied at Tougaloo College, Economics and Mass Communication. And I was in Jackson, Tougaloo. It's kind of like, the same city. But I was there for about 6 years, and after I graduated college, I moved to Houston, Texas. I was there for about a year, and then I accepted a better job in Panama City Beach, Florida. And I was there for a year and a half, I want to say. And I moved to Baton Rouge in 2020, and I've been here for 2 years now.
Yeah. So, I kind of want to talk about that journey a little bit as far as like, graduating from high school and then leaving the home house to go to college, and like most of us never turning back, right? Like that was kind of like your last time being at home in Chicago. Obviously you visited and things of that nature, but you know that first step of being on your own to go to college and just step away from like your childhood home. What was that kind of like as far as being the first time away from home for you?
It was very scary. I had family in Mississippi, but they were like hours away. I was young. It was maybe like my first time being on an airplane. Like I've been like when I was younger, but like in those teenage years, because I flew down by myself, and I was just really scared. But I feel like moving to the South, it was definitely a lot of the South is nice. They're sweet. It's so many great people. Not to say it's not any in Chicago, but I feel like the culture is different. Like in Chicago, we're a little more cautious of our surroundings and kind of harder to interact with. But when I moved to the South, literally everybody was speaking every time they saw you. Hey, how you doing? How you doing? So just getting accustomed to that, because when I first moved down to Mississippi, I was like, why do they keep speaking to me every time they see me? But I kind of just got accustomed to doing that, and I've ran into a lot of great people, and I feel like the transition was smooth because I moved to like a school versus just like a city, and I had no idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And so like kind of want to talk about that a little bit as far as just like that kind of culture shock, if you will, going from like living in the city where, you have your community and but like everybody kind of stays to themselves, right? Because the culture of a city is much different than like being in the South and like the different kind of small towns that exist in there. It's like as opposed to a community that consists of your families and friends or your block, your community can be an entire town. And so anybody that comes in and comes out, like it's bringing them into that community. And so like going to Tougaloo, what was that like for you as far as transitioning into that culture of what Tougaloo was compared to Chicago?
The culture was very welcoming, and I could appreciate that. Being so far from home and missing certain holidays, like, of course, the bigger holidays, I would go back home, but I stayed in Mississippi for like Thanksgiving And the first holidays that I had to stay at school because the turnaround time was just so quick, it didn't make sense to go home. It was, it made me sad. I had a lot of emotions. It was the first time I was away from family, and like I said, I was really young. But I met friends who were like, come to my family's house, or I would like drive the distance to see the family that I did have in Mississippi. So that was pretty cool. But meeting people just through different organizations, or when I started working, meeting coworkers, and just building that community and that accountability close that I kind of had at home. So it began to form as like a home away from home.
Yeah. So, in forming that kind of home away from home, like, were you intentional about it in the sense where, like, you wanted to make your home, like you said, away from home to be exactly like it? Or did you want it to be a little bit different since you were in a new space? And then, even like just going through just who you were as a person compared to like in college, where you're getting all these different experiences, meeting all these different kind of people, you're essentially transforming and like growing into your own self. And so, like, I wonder if like the community that you started to build while you were in Mississippi, if it looked anything different, or if it was similar to what you had in Chicago.
I would say it was completely different because in Mississippi and being at school, you're around people who are in school with you. They're educated, they're having the same experiences you're having, like preparing for finals or just the hustle and bustle of being a student. And they could relate to like those hard times and those celebrations because they too were experiencing the same thing versus like at home, their life and those friends and family, it looked completely different.
Hmm.
So I definitely kept them apart, and not intentionally, but I just feel like you just grow a closer bond when you're going through something and that person is going through the exact same thing versus like you're calling back home. You're like, oh, I had, a lot of homework to do, but the person on the other end of the phone is like, I just got off work. So it's just a different experience, but I cherish the separate worlds, I guess you can say.
Yeah. So, like, did you have a lot of friends that you communicated with from back home that, like, chose to not go to go to college and like go and begin that start into the workforce?
Yes, and they have been very supportive, like even up until this moment. Um, and it looked different, but like I said, our conversations were of different things, but they have always been supportive on my journey. And I have a lot of friends back at home and that I've gained along the journey. And I would say it's been very beneficial. And I'm just a relationship type of person. I'm a great friend, so I keep great company around me.
Yeah.
And I have friends that I still talk to that I went to like kindergarten and daycare with. So I think that's just like my personality.
Yeah, no, I love that, especially like when you talk about just the whole support and like it's kind of like you're building a bigger community everywhere you kind of go, right? Like moving from obviously from home, and like obviously you have all the people that you know there, but then you move into a new space, you need to build that bigger family. So it's like as you grow as an individual, it's kind of like your whole community grows as well, would you say?
Absolutely, because the things that I've experienced, I always share it with my friends and family back home. And it'll be something small like a new meal. Because, like, moving to the South, I gained like 25 pounds. The food was different. And, it would be like, oh, I tried this kind of meal. And they're like, oh, let me, try to make that at home. Or I have to try it. And I honestly think just me sharing my experiences inspired them to like, let me go travel more. Let me get outside of Chicago and see what's out there.
Yeah. So like whenever you did graduate from college, like did you spend some time in Mississippi afterwards, or did you like decide to like my stint in Mississippi has ended and so now I'm going to move on and go into different places?
It it was definitely my stint has ended. Maybe a few weeks after graduation, I moved to Houston. It was very quick. I just felt like that chapter had closed for me, and
Mhm.
I didn't want to get and this may be a bad word, but I just didn't want to get stuck, get stuck there. And I just wanted to like, and not get comfortable. So I was like, it's just time to turn the page, a new chapter.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so like um to talk about like that life after college, I know you talked about like you lived in two separate places in the course of 2 years, right? Like you lived in Texas and
Hmm.
you lived in Florida, and obviously the reasons as you mentioned beforehand had to do with your job, but like were there other reasons as far as why you chose Texas compared to literally all of the other 48 states that you could have went to or even going back home?
I had visited Texas and I just was like, I felt like it was a good mixture of the city, which was where I was from, but the hospitality of the South. I felt like it was a great mix. And I didn't want to go back home because I just was like, I feel like it's something more out there. It's still some things that I want to experience, some different cities. And not being from Mississippi, it was actually easy to transition to another state because it was just like I was in Mississippi for school, and when school ended, it was easy to pick up and go. Like I didn't have any family or other obligations that made me stay there.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I kind of want to touch on that a little bit because that's a key point. Like you mentioned earlier that you didn't want to necessarily get stuck. And I think that there's a whole mindset thing and not one, not wanting to get stuck, but then two, recognizing when these opportunities come, right? Like your one chapter was
Mhm.
closing and then a whole nother chapter was beginning. Like that whole like life after college where we're supposed to be real adults, right? Like unless you
Right.
go into like even when you go into graduate school, you get a little dip your toes in both ends of the water of being an adult and still being in school. But like when you go straight into that workforce, like you have to make the decision where it's like, okay, cool, everything that I've kind of gotten used to and started building here, I'm realizing that this is kind of like a not a real world in a sense. Like college is this kind of microcosm of an environment that has been created for me to be around people who are going through the same things that I am. Like they're either moved away from home or like may even be from that area, but because we're having similar experiences, we can all relate to each other compared to like um life after college where you're open more so to the entire world. So like that's kind of like a really scary experience. And so I'm curious as far as you to say, I don't want to get stuck, but like I'm willing to leave that comfort of what I've built to go into a whole new territory.
Right. Um, as far as being stuck, like, so I was done with school, and if I was to stay in Mississippi, let's just say like I started dating someone and starting a family, and just having those ties to like that location, because I feel like in the South, people are more, I don't want to say family oriented, but it's like a big deal. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like you run into so many people like, yes, I want to get settled in. I want to have my wife. I want to buy this piece of land and do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just was like trying a new chapter and trying a new city. It was very much so scary, but I feel like I would have had some regret wondering like what my life could have been if I stepped out on faith and explore a little bit.
It's kind of like writing your own narrative. Like you knew graduating from high school that there's obviously more out there than the city of Chicago. And like coming to Mississippi and getting embraced in that Southern culture, you're like, oh, I really like this, but there's still more out there. So like, I'm curious, what is the narrative that you're trying to write for Kasia? Like, what does that look like to you?
It looks like no limits, no yeah, no limits. Like I don't want to ever live my life being complacent. I'm very adventurous. I always want to see like what's next, what's more. And I don't know why, but like now that I've moved so many different places, it kind of scares me to like be in one place for like past 5 to 10 years. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the word? Is it like a nomad? Someone
Oh,
who's always just like
yeah, like a
traveling.
yeah,
That's
nomad.
that's me.
I feel that. So, like, to get back to this nomadic lifestyle that you have, let's talk about your time in Texas. What was that like for you? You know, you're out of college now, you're starting your first big person job. Like, what were you doing out there? And, like, what was kind of like the life that you were trying to build out there for that work life balance?
I feel like moving to Texas was definitely the hardest transition out of all the states that I've lived in, because when I moved to Mississippi, it was the safety net of school, like, with tuition, room and board, all those things. It was like you're safe. It's not like I'm paying rent or doing the adult things. So I definitely experienced those growing pains, transitioning to Texas. And I actually moved there with no real plan. I just knew it was time for the next chapter. So I didn't go like with a job secured. I didn't go just having a plan really, but I just knew I was ready for something new. I love the pace of the city, great restaurants, and a lot of opportunity. So I went and I started working for temp agencies. I had a degree and I just was like, I have a degree, anybody will hire me. And quickly I found out that wasn't the case. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I just was going to different temp agencies, and I found one that was a little more long term. But the reality, like you said, becoming transitioning into adulthood and really experiencing that, and like saving my money really, like in college it's kind of like, oh, I'm good, this I can save, that would be the responsible thing to do, but I don't really have to, versus being an adult, it's just like you have real bills, you have to make sure you're eating, gas, those real responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I love that you mentioned, like, as far as Texas being the hardest because you had to experience those growing pains, and I think that um you you kind of, like you say, you went there with a little bit of no plan, but it's kind of like you had the intention, like you had the why as far as what you wanted to be or what you wanted that to look like. You wanted something, as you mentioned beforehand, that was kind of similar to home as far as being a city and like the experiences and benefits that a city brings as far as like opportunities and just diversity of experiences. But like, as you mentioned beforehand, as far as being in the South and having that kind of warm Southern charm to it. And so, like, I think it's interesting that you say that you didn't have a plan, but like, you obviously had the right intentions as far as what you were thinking about for why you chose there. Because you could have chose anywhere, obviously. Um,
Hmm.
and so, like, I'm curious, like, what's the difference between Florida and Texas, or Texas and Florida, rather? Because what you said was for a better job. And so, like, is it that Texas gave you that experience to of what you wanted or what you were looking for in a job? Or was it that, like, Texas didn't provide the opportunities for a job that you were looking for based upon the experiences that you had, and knew had a clearer picture of what you wanted your career to look like?
I would say Texas, no, Florida. Um, if I could have chosen in the moment, I definitely would have stayed in Florida. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, Texas. Moving to Florida was not my ideal scenery, but I chose to move there because the job was more money. It was consistent. It wasn't like what may happen, and it was just quick, like, hey, can you start tomorrow? In the Texas job process, it was so long, so many interviews, you wouldn't hear back, you would hear back. I just appreciated the for sureness
Mm.
that Florida provided me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Like, stability is one of those things that I think that we're all essentially kind of looking for, kind of like what you were talking about in in Mississippi, like a lot of people, they talk about, I want to build a family, I want to have this land, and like this is going to be my life, because there's this sense of stability that you kind of get when you have these things. You know where you're laying your head at, you know who you may be seeing throughout the day. You kind of have a routine compared to like, um, not necessarily like you can't have that in a city, but like there are more, for lack of a better term, distractions that can come your way that can um, deviate you from that stability that you may be aiming for. And so I'm curious, like, that this growth experience that you've had between like Texas and Florida, I feel like they were really some transformative years for you. And like, um, I'm curious, like, what is the biggest takeaway that you've seen or you experienced that like really resonates with you, and like you're like, yeah, this is this is the this is the lesson that I'm gonna keep for the rest of my life.
That's a great question. I would say the biggest takeaway is bet on yourself. Like, and when I was living in Texas and just applying for jobs, I just was like, well, maybe I'm not the strongest candidate that I thought I was. I didn't have much experience. I just had the education.
Mm-hmm.
And when I moved to Florida, I was just like, listen, I've been in school for all these years. They are going to count for something. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
choose me. And I just laid that out, and I bet it on myself. And I appreciate how Texas challenged me, because a lot of students think once they graduate out of college it's just like all of these jobs. Like, no, you still have to work hard, you still have to stand out, you still have to meet those qualifications, you know. So that was the reality check for me, and it humbled me, honestly. Like, getting rejections or not hearing anything at all, it humbled me for sure.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that betting on yourself is one of the biggest takeaways, because I think that's what you're doing right now, right? Like, obviously, you're in law school in Baton Rouge, and this is something that you wanted to do. So, like, I'm curious, what was that turning point for you that you were like, hey, I'm in Florida, I'm making money, closer to family? Because if I remember correctly, your mom lives in Florida, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So like, you were closer to home or closer to family. Like, Florida's not necessarily too far from Mississippi. So like you could drive back and forth if that was something you wanted to do. But like there was still this yearn for like betting on yourself and taking it to that next level. So like what was that pivotal moment for you to decide that, hey, I want to go to law school?
I think I was excited to move to Florida, like you said, being close to family, and that was actually one of the things that the harder things that transitioning to Baton Rouge was for me, not being able to see my family as much. But what I did, I lost my train of thought. With Florida, I had the job and I was making the money, like you said, but I wasn't happy, and that that didn't sit well with me. And I was actually doing something that my degree correlated with. Like, I was an economics, business administration emphasis, mass communication, advertising emphasis, and I was working for an engineering company. And I started small, like in customer service, but then I went to accounting, which was kind of bigger. It was a more important component of the company. I had a lot of responsibilities, but I just wasn't happy. It just was like, is this it? You know,
Yeah.
I was having a lot of those moments, and it just was very repetitive. And I would just go to work, go home, and I just wasn't happy. And I just always wanted to do, as far as career wise, professionally, something that I enjoy and made me money. So that's
Hmm.
why I knew I wasn't done yet. It was more for me, and it was time for the next chapter once again.
Yeah. No, I think that that's a beautiful thing. Like, we all look for things that like fills our cup, right? Like, we want to have the most fulfilling lives that we possibly can. And like for some people, that involves relationships, as you mentioned beforehand. Like, people like find someone, they're like, hey, like this is my match, and like I'm fulfilled. And then for other people, it might be the career, and like that fulfills them and makes them happy. But what I'm hearing for you, it's like it's both of these things, right? It's not only just being in a space where I am around family and I'm getting everything that I want, or the independence of being on your own and living like a life where you basically can make your own rules, if you will. Because if I'm understanding correctly, you had both of those experiences. You had a life where you had your full on independence away from family, away from not necessarily friends, because you could build friends in Texas. But then you had your life where you had your family, you could get your cup filled from that, but like there was still something missing. And so like I'm curious around when it comes to law school or just being an attorney or a lawyer in general, like what about that fills your cup, and like what exactly is your why when it comes to following your passion for the law?
My favorite part about law, and I think what makes it so easy, because it has definitely been a difficult journey, but what keeps me going, I love giving back. I love helping people in any way that I can. And I didn't realize before I went to law school how law is intertwined in everything, literally, like medicine, family, work, anything, everything. Law is intertwined in that. And I love the flexibility of that profession. It's like I can do any field of law, any sector, and it has definitely stretched me. I've learned so much. I've met so many brilliant people. And every day or every conference or in the classroom, I'm always like, wow, I have those moments like I belong here. I feel good about this. And with difficulty, for sure, those moments make me feel like I'm in the right place.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I love that to hear that. So like um now it's kind of like we talked a little bit about like how being in school and your adult life is kind of like playing into both fields, right? Like you have the routine of being in school and like being around people that are going through the same thing as you, but you're also still adult, right? Like you still have to pay bills, got to put a roof over your head, because they usually don't give you housing whenever you're in like graduate and professional school. But like
Right.
I'm curious, what has this chapter been looking like for you, like compared to all the other ones?
This chapter has been very unique with the pandemic. I started law school in a pandemic. So um, I think with my law school was transitioning with me. It was just new for all of us. So it was very scary because we didn't know, like, are we in person? Are we virtual? How am I going to meet classmates? Like, I'm in this new city. Um, I definitely feel like this chapter, community has been more important than ever, because like I said, law school is very hard, but it's been a journey, but it's also been fun too, because like you said, I'm an adult, so I can, explore a little more. I can do more, but also maintain that schedule that I kind of learned from undergrad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like how are you balancing with that? Like I know just from knowing you personally, like you've always been an individual who can like, balance all these things. I don't You're the only person that I've ever known to have like two, three, five jobs, but still be able to get through school and like manage and hold it down. Like, I really, and I over exaggerate when I say five jobs, but really and truthfully, like you had a lot of responsibilities, not only just having like a job, but then also the different organizations that you were a member of and being active in that, and still maintaining and being a student and being a successful student at that. So like um I'm curious, as far as with all those experiences that you've had, do you find actually being an adult a little bit easier because you've had the practice of knowing how to maintain all of these different balances that you have to uphold? or is it a different playing field because you know law school isn't undergrad. It's a totally different beast. And like as you mentioned, being in a pandemic, like you had the sense of community because you might have like your some of your classmates and your roommates and things of that nature, but like the sense of building a community, like maybe if things were status quo, like it's a little bit different. And now that we are in this quote new normal, like how do you go about building that community and utilizing all the skill sets that you've gained over the years?
I've seen everything that I've learned or experienced over time. I've seen like the lesson in it or why it was important. And it has definitely made adulthood easier because I've already, like you said, I've worked a lot while I was in school, many jobs. So I've always had time management down pat, prioritizing. I've paid my bills for as long as I can remember. Like since I've left home in Chicago, I've taking care of myself. So for others who are in law school, this is their, you know, how I transitioned from Mississippi to Texas. They're kind of doing that now from undergrad to law school, where I'm already kind of established. Like I know, you know, I know this is coming, or I already know how to be kind of responsible with my money and prioritizing my time and knowing my limits of what I can and can't do. And that has been very important on this journey, just setting boundaries and things like that. So I feel that all those experiences have helped me in some way and prepared me for this moment.
Yeah, no, I really like that how you say it, like knowing limits and setting boundaries. I think that that is like very key and very hard at the same time because it's a continuous race, right? Like, and essentially you have to know how to pace yourself and know what leg to run into the race. So like I'm curious, how did you go about figuring out how to set those limits and what boundaries to set for yourself?
It was hard for me because like I said, I love people. I love to help people, and I'm always there for anybody, any way I can be. But being that kind of person, but having such a strict, demanding schedule when I first came into law school, it was very hard because before law school, I can take your call, I can spend that time, but it's like, no, these are my study hours or I'm in class. And I feel like what helped me though was just having a supportive community who understood that and they didn't take it personal that I wasn't available. And setting boundaries for myself was hard as well because I kind of got a little routine working. You know, you work 8 to 5, and after that you can do anything. But with law school, it's like you need to study 24 hours a day basically. Like it's not a off time. Like granted you should set some time apart, you know, to do things that you enjoy and just take a break, but it was demanding. I feel like I've learned like through trial and error for sure.
Yeah. I think that what you touched on there is a real key topic too. Like how you mentioned as far as when you have a job, right? You work 8 to 5 and that's kind of pretty much it. And then like you can just do whatever you want to do afterwards. But like what I hear you doing is a little bit more than a job. Like you're building a career. And like, essentially a career can be a job, but like not every job is a career. In the sense of saying that like that passion that you have towards it, that why that you're putting into it, that extra effort that is going to give you the long nights or the networking events or the whatever you need to do to get to a certain point within your career, because this is something that not only you want to do for yourself but your contribution that you see towards society. And so that leads me to ask the question, because I think about, we talked a little bit about filling your cup in all three aspects, as far as like family, self, and now we're talking about work a little bit. When you get out of law school and you're getting that first job into your career, like how are you going to balance all three of those things where you not only taking care of your career and the things that you need to do, and not only being a high performer, but being engaged. I think that the intentionality of being engaged is something that's very important whenever you want to have some type of success in any kind of endeavor. And so, like, how are you going to maintain that engagement in all three facets of what makes you you?
I think law school has intentionally prepared me for that, building that in. Like now, I study or go to class crazy hours, and I feel like work will be that way too. Like off the clock, you still have to like study cases, go through evidence or whatever field you may be interested in. But I feel like you'll still have that like off the clock work. But in law school, I'm learning to like literally me and my friends we plan conversations like 2 weeks out. Like, are you free? Thursday the 18th, does that work for you? Okay, what time? Like, so I'm kind of learning that now, like scheduling, it is so important. I feel like for relationships and for myself, but I don't want to be robotic about it. Um, but I'm still learning the balance of it all, but it's very important to me. I'm not like work, 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 and no, because family is important to me as well as my own personal time. So I feel like I do a great job now of just setting those times apart. Like, okay, I accomplished this, like just mapping it out. Like I'm a list type of person. If I can get these three things done, okay, I can do something for myself. Okay, a friend called me last night. Let me call her back in that time. And it's just important to do things that like my professor always said, if you're studying and you're getting stressed out with the material, don't go calling or answering a call that will further stress you out. Like
Mm-hmm.
do something that takes you away from it. So I guess just scheduling accordingly is what I plan to do.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think that what you mentioned as far as having that intentionality and like scheduling things, I think that that's very important because it's like you want to maintain those relationships, but like you have to also maintain everything else that you've built, right? Like you can't just say, I'm not going to work on work today. Like as you were mentioning, you got to study for cases. You got to be prepared so that when you're coming into work, the preparatory time is over. This is showtime. So you need to make sure that you're as fully prepared as possible. But then at the same time, um, like you also want to have that kind of point of reprieve where you can have those kind of conversations with people that relax you or make you happy or do things for yourself that might include being to yourself for a little bit of time just so that you can recuperate. So like I totally agree with what your professor says as far as answering a call from someone that is gonna make it a little bit worse because you want to make sure you fill your cup. You don't want to fill your cup with negativity. You only have so much to give. So I really appreciate you just taking out the time today and like just having some conversation with me. I really appreciate all the jewels that you dropped today. As you mentioned beforehand, making sure that you have that kind of holistic lifestyle and filling up your cup with like family, self, and work, and how you sharing your journey of just living in different places has kind of highlighted those things. So like I'm curious, what's next for you? Do you have like a particular place that you would like to live where you have all of those things in one place, or are you still growing in like your career or growing in yourself that like there are certain experiences that you want to make sure that you have before you can quote have that stability um in your life?
Right now, my plan is kind of full circle because I'm kind of ready to go back home. So this summer I'll be accepting an internship in Chicago, and I'm using that summer to see how the balance will be, the work life balance, and if it's great, Chicago is definitely somewhere I would like to go because I miss the city at this point. Like I love the South, I love the food, the people, but I miss the hustle and bustle. I miss the good food. I miss my city, and I've never been an adult in my own city. So I'm excited to experience that. I'm looking forward to it. But if it does not work out, I'm interested kind of in like the East Coast. So we shall see.
Yeah, no, I think that that's very beautiful, and I hope nothing but the greatest things for you, my friend.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Of course. So I have a few questions that I usually ask on every show. So like, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go through these lightning questions, and I'm gonna let you get back to your day.
Okay.
What is your favorite relaxation or self care activity?
I love yoga.
Ooh, I didn't know that. When did you start yoga?
I started yoga when I moved to Texas, and I just was like, I want to do something that will stop my brain racing for a moment. That's relaxing. I love the sounds of yoga. I love the peace it brings, and just doing it for so long. I've learned like it's a fast paced yoga where you're like sweating and doing all these complicated poses, but I'm more on like the slow side and really just engaging my mind and body.
Mm, no, I think that that's very important. What's your best book recommendation?
Right now, I am reading Women Evolve by Sarah Jakes Roberts, and that's the season I'm in. I'm trying to evolve.
I love it. I love that a lot. And one person you want to thank for your journey thus far?
I want to thank my sister. She has been my backbone through all the ups and downs, and I know she's tired of me calling her, but I just appreciate her support, her transparency, and her love.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. Well, thank you, man. I really hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. You too.
All right. This has been another episode of Don't Be Coy with Uncle Lew. As always, I'd like to thank this episode's guest for a great conversation, as well as thank you, the listener, for joining in. Whether you're a first time listener or a regular, I always appreciate your support. If you like today's episode and ever want to listen to more, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. And to join our community and access future bonus content, be sure to visit dbkpodcast.com.